Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about something totally different. We are sharing our experiences about being poll workers in the last election in San Francisco. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about something a little bit different, our experience as poll workers. Yes, Lee and I both worked at a polling station in the last election in San Francisco, and it was actually a very interesting experience and one you might even want to try out. So, Lee, I think you were the first one who became interested in this. What brought it to your attention?
I did. I think I roped you into this.
Actually, I think I got an email from the Board of Elections just randomly, and I was like, oh, this sounds kind of cool. And you're like, that's weird. I'm signing up for that.
I know. It's because we're kind of like the same person. So I went to a talk from Stacey Abrams last winter, I guess. And one of the things she was talking about, because she's doing a lot of work around fair elections. I think Fair Fight is her organization. And she was talking about the importance of the people who kind of are part of the election process. And I hadn't really thought of that before, that there are all of these people. There's literally like an army of people in every community that are kind of processing the elections. And so we were at this talk, and it was with a group of people, and we all were like, who are these people who are working as poll workers?
Like, oh, it's like the old people sitting in the garage,
right? You know, and so one of the things, a friend of a friend suggested, she was like, well, we should all be poll workers because you actually want people who are engaged and interested, and maybe even people who are of special skills to be part of this poll worker population. And so you and I ended up talking about it, and then we both signed up to be poll workers. And so I didn't really know what I was signing up for. I did not fully appreciate it was going to be, oh my gosh, how many hours were we there? Like, we were at different locations, but it was a very long day. Yeah, I think I had to be there at like 5:30 in the morning or something like that.
I think I've kind of blocked it out. But yeah, I think you were there from like 6 in the morning because the polls in California, at least in San Francisco, are open. I know this because I just got the little brochure for the next election. I think they're open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. So that's just the time they're open.
Yeah.
So we had to go like an hour and a half early, and we're there. I think I was there till like about 10 maybe.
Yeah, 10:30. There was like a discrepancy in one of our numbers. I'll talk about that later. And so there was a lot of, we had to sit, and yeah, it took us a long time. I think we were the last poll in our area to close. Well, the poll was closed, but like to pack up all of our stuff.
Basically.
And so, I think that one of the things that has been interesting, though, is it really to get me thinking about how important, each person in this process is. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about who shows up to do this work and why many of us need to consider taking a day off and doing this sort of work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I guess my experience previously, other than being a voter, with polls at all, was once in law school, I was an election observer in Ohio. And we kind of went and like observed what was going on, and there were a lot of issues,
Yeah.
like you immediately saw there are some major issues. And, you saw like when people would have a problem, like they weren't necessarily getting the correct advice on what they were allowed to do or not do. It turns out, I definitely did not fully appreciate just how complicated all of this stuff really is.
Yeah. And the process for the chain,
of
custody, it's just really intense.
It's super intense, but it's also like it needs to be that intense. And in San Francisco, they do it for a reason, because not that long ago, some ballots kind of showed up in the Bay, and like that's a problem. So, it was actually, I was really impressed, I have to say, by all the logistics of this. I'm kind of a process person in general, and the logistical process of like the training and just the, people have really thought through this.
Yeah.
And here, like, none of the voting machines are connected to the internet at all.
And they had brand new voting machines when we did this.
Yeah, they were totally new. No one had ever used them before. So, you basically had like a paper ballot and you have the electronic version. And at the end of the night, like, the different pieces go with different people. And I think it'd be pretty hard to cheat. I
think it would be pretty hard to cheat, but it felt pretty easy to screw up. I think that was the thing. All right, so let's talk about the whole process. So you and I have this discussion and we both fill out, I think you had to answer like an online questionnaire to be considered to be a poll worker. There was a lot like, do you have a pulse and can you follow directions?
Right. It was like, can you read this paragraph and tell us what this paragraph said in a series of multiple choice questions below the paragraph.
Yeah. And then I was your run-of-the-mill poll worker.
Well, then we had to do an interview.
Oh, then we also had to do an interview. And I remember the question being like, can you work long hours?
Right.
And have you ever and I think it was like, can you handle talking to people who have different needs or, because you have a lot of people who vote in person with ADA accommodations and things like that. So you kind of had this interview and then you get assigned. I was your run-of-the-mill poll worker and you were a poll inspector.
Yes, I was the supervisor.
Oh, the supervisor.
Yeah, so somehow in my interview on the phone, somehow we started discussing what I do and the fact that I used to be a lawyer and now I have this business. And this guy who sounded like he was like 25 or whatever was like, oh, maybe you should be an inspector. I'm like, really? Do you think I'm qualified to be an inspector? I've never done anything. I've never been. Shouldn't you have like, the basic level of like poll working first? He's like, oh, no, you'll be totally qualified for this. Let me ask you a few more questions. They were basically like, could you supervise other people? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay. And I think I got paid like $20 extra.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So we get assigned to our role, and then in San Francisco, you go to like a couple-hour training. So I went to a couple-hour training. Was your training the same?
It was the same, and then so basically it was like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours in a classroom, and then we went and practiced on the machines.
Yep.
Did you practice?
We did practice. Yeah. We got a team. We had to like set them up. We practiced using our handbook that told us to do all the different pieces. And then we filled out all our paperwork so we could get our whopping like $120 or $180. I can't even remember.
Yeah, but you realize it's actually a pretty expensive process when you start scaling it up.
It's a super expensive process. And then when you consider, I would think we were there for like 16 hours or something like that.
Plus the pay has to cover your like 3 hours of training too.
Right, exactly. So you're kind of volunteering. And I think now I read the paperwork, you actually can volunteer and they won't pay you. I didn't.
Yeah, I think I think what it is that some companies will give you the day off, but they won't do that if you're getting paid. So basically you donate your salary to some fund or something.
All right. So the idea is, we did our training. I will be honest, I did not feel like I had a super great grasp of exactly everything that was going to happen, but I had my handbook.
In our training, the machine didn't work.
Oh, that's not a good sign.
So we were like, oh, I guess this could really happen. Like, it's not booting. What do we do?
Yeah. So we get our assignments and then we roll in.
You think you didn't know what to do. I'm supposed to be supervising this thing. They're like, you should call your workers and see if they're coming. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Luckily, it turned out that actually, I think 2 of the people out of the 4 that were working in my station had already been there before. So they actually knew well more than I did.
That was good. Yeah. We didn't have a lot of knowledge base in my poll location, which was at a firehouse, which was very exciting. I
was at a school. So we had like kids coming through the principal's office all day.
So you get there super early, crack of dawn early. I've got like my whole, you have to have all your food for the day. I felt like
I had to bring the ballots.
And that's right. You had to bring the ballots.
That's what the supervisor does. In your training, they give you this enormous like suitcase basically that you have to like, I think actually that was one of the key questions he asked me is, do you have a car? And I'm like, yes, I have a car. He's like, great, then you're qualified.
Yeah.
Because, I was like at the school at the top of a really steep hill in San Francisco. Like, there was no way to get there without a car. Yeah. So I'm like wheeling at 6 a.m, wheeling my giant suitcase of ballots up the hill.
And then you have to set these whole things up.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. You have to set up all of the places where you are actually filling out the polls, and then there's this huge machine that counts the polls in San Francisco that is like standalone, and then there are all of these security measures, and so like there are these like tiny tabs, and you have to track all of the chain of command, and there are
and like one of mine, the printer, like the numbers didn't match, and they made this whole big deal. You have to call them immediately. So I call them immediately. I'm like, the number doesn't match. They're like, oh, it's fine.
I know. And then there are all these, our station had all this trouble with the they had these different colored, almost like baby zip ties that were, locking things in place. And one of the zip ties broke, and then there's like, oh no, the zip tie broke,
that's bad.
It's bad because then, how are you securing things? And so there was a main number that you had to keep calling over and over again to get all of your questions answered so they could track. I mean, basically they were writing down every interaction.
And they have like a guy who's going around to check in on you and like make sure everything's, in my case, I don't remember what it was. Like the space we were in was not like big enough basically. So we're like trying to figure out how to get all this stuff set up in there. And then like I'm focused on getting all the machines turned on because like that was my job, and I had some like secret code and on and on and on. And I'm not really paying that much attention to like what the people who are setting up the table are doing. They have their own instruction sheet. I assume they're following it. Bad assumption. Because at some point, like an hour or two in, I asked them for like a sample ballot in a different language or something, and they're like, "Oh, we don't have that." I'm like, "What do you mean you don't have that? That's like literally in what I brought you. Like, if you don't have that, something is wrong." And it turned out that like this guy had dropped off a different set of ballots that they weren't really supposed to be using, and then they did use them, and he was freaking out about that. And in the end, it turned out it didn't matter anyway. But just all these things where you're like, oh. This whole process just totally derailed because somebody opened the wrong box.
Right. We had issues. One of the things I didn't realize caused a lot of issues were like soiled ballots or people wanting to, screwing up their mail-in ballot, and so they bring it in person and they're trading it in.
That was a complicated process.
Yeah, or that they lost that ballot, and then you're trying to prove where you live and like what documentation is okay. We do not have ID rules in San Francisco, so you don't need an ID. I mean, then you're like checking names off one list, and every hour you're updating them and checking them off on another list. I mean, there's a ton of process, and I think one of the things that I didn't really appreciate was like the immense attention to detail.
Oh, it's crazy.
That is required, and then how specific you're supposed to be. So one of my jobs for part of the day was to stand next to the voting machine where you're supposed to tell the scanning machine. Yeah. And so it's like people walk up with their ballots, and all you're like allowed to say is you may place your ballot. It doesn't matter if it goes this way or that into the machine, and wait for the ding. But there were all these very specific rules, like make sure you don't like suggest that you know what's on the ballot or make any suggestions about how they could do this or what they could do. Or then if there's an error, you can't give them an opinion. You can be like, read the screen and answer yes or no, and because they really don't want you influencing somebody's actions. And it is, especially if you're kind of like a helpful person, it can be hard to be like, I can't answer that for you. You can read the screen and choose yes or no because I don't want to influence your decision.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I felt this stuff around like the mail-in ballots and like what was going on with those. Because people can, if you have your mail-in one and you just like have filled it out, you can just drop it off, no problem. But sometimes people would come in and they say, oh, I made a mistake and like now I need to like trade this in, or I have the ballots but I don't have the envelope, and then that's like a whole different scenario. That whole stuff was very complicated because then people end up having to vote with like provisional ballots and stuff, and then they don't like that. And it's like, well, then go find your envelope. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Like you cannot submit this without this. And we are not allowed to take this from you.
Right. And it was an interesting assortment of people who work as poll workers. I mean, at my polling place, there was someone who was a journalist who was our poll inspector who'd never done anything like this before. There was myself, who was a lawyer. There was somebody who worked in tech who I think got the day off. There was somebody who was retired. And it was kind of an interesting assortment of people who kind of had to dive down and figure this stuff out. And
yeah, we had like a retired woman, another like youngish tech person, and then a high school student who was actually fantastic. And she was probably the most knowledgeable person because she had done this like 3 times and thought it was super fun.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, it was definitely a very interesting like cross section of the community of people like, oh, these are not people I normally hang out with, but let's like all figure it out.
Exactly.
And even like we had a security person who like they didn't tell her to bring lunch, and so at some point I was like, all right, well, why don't I like drive and get coffee and lunch at the Safeway and I'll take you with me. You're trying to solve all these types of problems because like there's really not lunch like up in these hills, and there's not public transit, and you have 45 minutes and like you're not going to get up and back. Like, all right, let's go. Yeah. Let's figure this out.
Yep. Yeah, I was, I had to pump breast milk in the middle of my poll working day, and I was at a firehouse, and I was like, I don't know. I just kept luckily the fire chief was a woman and was basically like, you can use my office while I'm gone. I was like, thanks. You're just kind of rolling with it because everybody's trying to make accommodations for everybody and take breaks. And there are all these rules about how many people have to be on the floor. And if the
the break thing was like a whole other level.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of attention to detail. So
you get your 15-minute and then this other person gets their 15-minute and then you get your 30 and they can't overlap. And then one person's like, well, what if I want to combine my two 15s into 130? And you're like, oh my God, like just don't fight the system.
I know, exactly. And there was a lot of hurry up and wait. I mean, a lot of the time we were just like hanging out.
Right. Well, this was also a very slow
It was a slow election. It was a local election, which one of the reasons why they, I think, chose to roll out those new machines that election was because it was not like the upcoming presidential primary election, which is going to be crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I've signed up to do this again. I don't know if you did, but
I can't do this one, but maybe I'll do November.
Yeah, so I'm kind of hoping that if they do send me back to the same physical location, that we do not have the exact same spot, because I'm like, there is literally no way that we can have a busy election in this like tiny little zone.
Yeah,
like we need the gymnasium,
right? Yeah. So, one of the things that I thought it was interesting, because we were also texting each other, comparing our experiences throughout the day.
Being like, how many people are at your place?
Right.
We've had like 100.
Yeah, exactly. That, I think it was interesting to really realize like what people were curious about and how we knew what to do. And I really appreciated how hard it is to protect the system, to protect the process, to keep everybody impartial and to not have any influence.
Right. And I mean, I think definitely just the logistics of, like you said, you have all these like list of people coming in. And at the end of the day, I mean, it was pretty stressful because at the end of the day, you have this whole detailed process to go through to count each and every single ballot, like whether it was submitted or spoiled or never used, and do those numbers match up with the numbers that are on your piece of paper? Like, if not, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was kind of a nail biter to see like, are these numbers going to match up?
Yeah. And you'd have it in all of these different boxes. And I think had we started the day doing that kind of stuff, that would have been one thing. But, it's 10 o'clock at night. It was freezing in the firehouse where I was working. And so it's like, you're freezing. My hands are literally like numb.
Everyone's tired.
Everybody's exhausted because we've been there since like 6 a.m. And you're trying to count and reconcile everything and follow these directions, which I thought San Francisco did a nice job of really trying to document. They did do a lot of documentation. They worked very hard on that, clearly. But still, going step by step when you're exhausted, I was kind of shocked more mistakes weren't getting made.
Yeah, I was really astonished when our numbers lined up at the end. I was like, yes. And then it was fascinating because they've done this whole process where a different set of people come to get your paper ballots that come for because basically they scan the ballot. So you've got like the paper copy and you've got this digital version, basically the memory card. Yeah, and so like the sheriff had to come and their sheriff's deputies had to come and get the memory cards, and then for some reason they send somebody from like the bus company, like
the transit association.
Yeah, like the transit authority basically comes to get your paper ballot. You're like, okay, this is just all very weird.
It is all very strange, but they're just trying to make sure that stuff doesn't get spoiled, but
and we're all signing off on everything. It's like, all right, well, this is indeed like what went with this guy, and this is what this lady picked up, and like we're all agreeing to this, and then if it goes missing, well, we got to figure out what happened.
Yeah, and then there's a whole team of people at the elections department who then have to deal with our handwritten forms where we totaled everything up. I mean, it's pretty intense. And I think afterwards we talked a little bit about like what we thought of the process and whether it was kind of sustainable. And I think for me, what I think was pretty stunning is what you were trying to do with that length of time, and that's a very, very long day. 16 hours, 17 hours is a super long day. We've been on our feet a lot of the day. And like, I think we got a lunch break. Did we even get a dinner and a meal break? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you got like 30 minutes for lunch and then a few like 15-minute breaks.
But I mean, we really didn't get that many breaks.
No.
And you're putting an awful lot of faith into the fact that people can be very detail-oriented after 16 hours. So I don't know. One thing I kept thinking was there's got to be a better way to have people help with especially the custody piece that are so exhausted.
Yeah, I was like, man, maybe we should have like 2 shifts, but then you've got to like train everybody and train twice as many people,
which is super intense. I think they have a hard time filling these roles.
Yeah, well, and that's a strong argument for why we should make an election day a holiday, so that then a lot more people would actually be able to, help out here.
Yeah. So I think, with knowing that it is not like an easy day, it's not an easy day, but I think that I also really felt that there was kind of a call to duty of people who are process oriented, that can work long days and have the ability to carefully follow directions, because that's not the easiest thing to do.
No, it's not. But it's also like, you don't really have to know. I mean, I guess I was more concerned like, well, I don't know anything. And they're like, we tell you everything. Like, basically the question the guy asked on the phone is more or less like, will you follow a detailed process?
And call if there are problems.
And he's like, what would you do if you don't know what to do? I'm like, I would call you. He's like, yes. Correct answer. It's like, would you make a guess? I'm like, no, I would not make a guess. I would call you.
Right. And I think that I think that law students and lawyers are uniquely outfitted for that, because we like a good process.
Yeah. And we're good at following directions.
We're very good at following directions.
And we can make other people follow directions and make them be like, no, you need to, like, what do you mean you're using the wrong box of stuff?
And I think there's not a lot of discussion about voter tampering or the inability for people to access voting in San Francisco. It's a pretty liberal state.
They make it pretty simple.
We don't have ID laws. We don't have, it's pretty simple. But in these areas of the country where there is some discussion about whether or not the voting system is working, I think that is even makes it more important for folks to not just be like poll watchers like you were.
Because we couldn't do anything.
Because you couldn't do anything. You were just watching.
And we were basically like, oh, it sounds like they're giving you bad information. Go back and talk to them again. You should be able to submit a provisional ballot.
Right.
Good luck.
Whereas there's also the person who's sitting making that decision if they should give you the provisional ballot and is following those rules as they've been stated. And that's a very powerful role. And I think I didn't fully realize how powerful these poll worker roles really are when it all comes down to it, because they are the gatekeepers to the democracy.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's also a question of, how hard are you working to like try to get that person the ability to vote? You can make that decision of like, look, anybody who comes in here, like they should have every possible opportunity to cast their vote, or you cannot make that decision.
Yep.
And I think it's very eye-opening just to see that it is a very powerful role.
And, I think one of the things that we're probably going to see with the next few elections are longer lines and who's going to be in charge of moving people through so people don't leave because we don't have the day off. I think that it was also a great advertisement for me about how important it is to do mail-in ballots.
Right.
Because then that removes a lot of this opportunity for struggle because I think there's less human element with a mail-in ballot. I assume it just like goes and gets opened and gets counted. I assume.
Yeah, I think they just separate it. Basically, like check the outside, separate the inside.
But you're not having, you're not necessarily having all of these different points where things can go awry.
Right. And I think it's also worth having people think about, like, as a voter, what are things I can do to ensure that, like, I'm not going to end up in a scenario where, like, I can't cast my ballot.
Oh, good point.
It's like, well, if you have the opportunity to vote early, maybe you want to do that. Maybe so that then you can go do something else on poll day, or that you can just know that your ballot went in. I think sometimes people just like, oh, I can only do it that day. It's like, again, like it depends where you are. And, these are things you could be advocating for, is like, should there be early voting in my community?
Right.
To alleviate that crush at the last minute.
Right. Or just encourage your own little circle of people. Like, let's all do mail-in ballots.
Right. Or I had to go to City Hall. I guess the day I did training, you do this at City Hall, and they had like the early voting stations open. And there, and it's literally just, actually, no, I don't think they did. I think I did it the next day. But anyway, point being, I voted early, like in person. And even then, like, there were issues because I'd been out of the country and like they didn't have the right address. And, it was like on and on and on. I'm like, okay, I'm a person who like thought I had this together.
I'm literally working in the election.
Yeah, I'm literally a supervisor at the poll. And it turns out that actually they think I still live out of the country. And they're like, yeah, we're going to have to get that corrected for you. So I think, all these things, like, you want to plan early as a voter and then also try to get involved. And, I'm imagining, you hear these stories about different jurisdictions who maybe don't have like, paper trails and like their things are connected to the internet. And it's really important stuff.
It is really important stuff. And I think that so often we get caught up in the big elections, the presidential elections or this or that.
Right.
But, really in our communities, it's what's happening the day of,
Oh, and interestingly
really
enough,
makes a difference.
Yeah, we were kind of like, oh my gosh, 200 people showed up all day. This is so boring, whatever. Doesn't matter. But then it turned out that I think it took weeks to get some of these local
RDA race.
The DA resolved because it was ranked choice voting and it was a very, very, very close election.
Mm-hmm.
And that, arguably will have a fundamental impact on the community because the DA who got elected was very interesting.
Yeah, super progressive, even for San Francisco. To have a couple San Franciscans be like, wow, this DA is super progressive.
Super progressive by San Francisco standards. That'll be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Didn't he just eliminate, I think he just eliminated cash bail.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so that, I felt like I was actually happy that there was some close races because then I felt like, okay, every ballot that we helped count actually may have impacted this race.
And I think you mentioned the ranked voting. This is something I think that San Francisco is kind of a special snowflake about, but that's actually kind of weird the first time you learn about it. And again, there was some confusion by people who are voting maybe for the first time about what to do with that.
Yeah, because you get to pick more than one option.
Right, you get to pick more than one option. And there were very specific rules about what you could say about the ranked choice voting to not change somebody's outcome.
Right. People get confused. Like, well, do I have to pick all of these people, or do I read the sign?
Read the sign, or I'm going to read you my script explanation. And I think so. It really instilled upon me that there are so many parts in this democratic process that actually can really compound to make change. Like you said, I think there were just like 1,000. It was like a very small number of votes.
Oh, I think way under
1,000.
It was like a handful.
It was. So you've got in a community like ours, and San Francisco is not like a huge community compared to other metropolitan areas, but but we saw a couple hundred people at our ballot places.
Yeah,
just the people who worked at our ballot places had the power to shift an election if it wasn't done correctly. We didn't.
Yeah.
We followed all the rules. We were very careful. Don't worry. But I think it really showed to me that, we all need to own being part of this process to protect the nature of the elections. And if you really want to invoke change, besides, I think, supporting people like what Stacey Abrams is doing and what's happening on the national stage, what's happening in some of these states, I think if you're worried, let's say, about what's happening in Georgia, where Stacey Abrams could be argued lost the governor election because of the way that they were running their elections. If all the law students in Georgia, and there are a few law schools in Georgia, signed up to be poll workers, I wonder how that would change the way that the institution is interacting with people.
Well, and I think it just changes people's perspectives, too, when you actually look at it from the inside and realize, wow, this is, I have a lot more respect for it. It's just a very, very complicated process.
Yeah, really, really hard to get done right. And there are a lot of people who are working really hard to get it done right. I really think the Department of Elections in San Francisco is working really hard to get it right. And it's still very hard.
Yeah, exactly. And they're trying their best.
They are really trying their best.
They're really actually not trying to suppress any votes.
No, they're really trying to make sure everybody votes. You can even if you aren't a citizen, you can still vote for our school boards. We are really trying hard to have everybody be able to vote and to have their voice heard. And it is still very complicated.
Yeah. It was definitely an interesting experience. I recommend it.
Yeah. So, one day, you can, maybe a training in one day, but I think if you have the opportunity to pull some people together, you can go to the training as a group. You can all sign up for the same training. But I think that it could actually really change your community. I think it's kind of an exciting thing.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time.
We are.
But if you have more questions about poll working, you're welcome to write to us. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you did, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you won't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Alison or myself at Alison@lawschooltoolbox.com or Lee@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.